here's Ryan.
Hey, welcome on into the reckoning. It is time to get down to business here. We got a couple solid hours of politicking, talking, and all the things ahead. And I'm glad that you are in with us. You folks know the drill. You want to sound off? I'd love to hear from you. Social media, you can hop on the live streams, Facebook, Rumble, Instagram, X, get in the live chat. Just look for Real Talk Radio Network. I'll see it there. You can always call me on the phone line, 636-224-6300. Or if you want the Real Talk Radio app, that is always one of the most fun to get involved in. You can download that on your local app store. Just search for us and get that little patriotic eagle logo. But we'll go right to it today. We've got a lot of national news. I'm going to save all that for the second hour. Either that or I might make Scott answer for some of the federal level stuff, too, because we get to do that around here. But no, we're going to go right back to Missouri. Pardon me if my voice sticks through. Representative Scott Miller's in studio with me, District 69 here in St. Charles. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, Ryan. How are you?
I am doing very well, thank you. And it's great to catch up with you. We were just talking. It has been a little while.
It has.
A little while. I think I had you on at least once, I think, when you were running in 2024.
Yep.
Then I think that you and Mike Koslow came in at one point last year. So
yeah, in between, I think.
So yeah, something like this. So it's been like an every year thing. We should try to make it happen more than once a year, but not too much. But more,
yeah,
but not too much.
Not too much.
You're a busy man, and we like you to stay busy there at the State House because there's a lot of stuff going on. But oh my, we've got into it. This has been a very busy legislative session. Congratulations, you all are doing a heck of a lot more than the federal Congress right now.
Yeah,
at least
we're moving a lot of bills out of the House.
By all appearance, yeah, absolutely. And we've talked ad nauseum about those. But I'm just curious. I mean, you've got a background in business. You're a business owner now, so this is you have a foot in the game on a lot of this stuff because it doesn't just affect you as a citizen, as a taxpayer.
Right.
You've got businesses and employees. There's a lot of these things that affect you. So. How are you feeling? What are your general thoughts here now that you're coming to the close of your second session? Of course, you filed to run for office again, unopposed, at least on the Republican ballot in August. You'll face a Democrat challenger there in District 69, which is St. Charles, some of St. Peter's, Weldon Springs.
So
is there any St. Peter's in there?
A little bit. St. Peter's kind of creeps across the page extension.
That's right, because I'm in St. Peter's. I'm in a St. Charles zip code in a St. Peter's city limit, so I'm one of those weirdos that no one with the post office knows what to do with me. But how's it going? What are your overall thoughts this time around, second one through?
It was definitely, it was busy last year, but I didn't have really a frame of reference. This year was even busier than last year. I think we put 100 bills out of the House to the Senate before we hit spring break, which was 4 weeks ago, maybe. I don't remember exactly. But, we've moved a lot of what I think is good legislation. Not perfect. None of us ever gets everything we want. But as long as it's good, then we're improving the status quo. And now mostly what we're dealing with in the House is Senate bills that have come over, and we're working with those. And then the budget passed the Senate, I guess it was last night. And so I think those are going to end up going to conference, and then we'll see what we get out of that.
Yeah, and of course that's, This year has seemed a little bit different. I know that we always, everyone likes to talk about the Imperial Senate. It's very easy in the House, especially to point out, well, it's the Senate's fault. And of course, everyone in the Senate would talk about, well, actually, a lot of them will talk about the Senate is the problem. But it seemed to me this year that, like the legislation or not, that just removing that, there was more movement. It felt like there was a little more cohesion, that stuff was actually getting done. I got a sense that some of that might even be from the governor's priorities, some of which, of course, income tax and some other things he stated. But it just seemed like it moved along quite a bit more on a few big issues. Maybe I'm wrong on that one, but it felt that way from the outside.
I think that's a pretty fair estimation. I think both sides have improved from last year. And that's not casting blame or aspersions, just being excited that, wow, this is what it looks like to work a little better together. And I think that's a good thing, and I hope it continues, next year.
I agree, because there's a lot of things to tackle, and we're going to have some big plans to put together. Which that, of course, that leads me out. We've got a long list of stuff here, folks, that I'd love to talk about. Which some of it we've already covered with a few other folks this week over the last month or two. But I'm curious to get your take on a few things. So HJR 173, 174 met its final passage this week. The Senate substitute came back to the House. It was voted on. The vast majority, there were a few Republicans, of course, that voted no. We've talked to a couple of them this week that have some reservations.
Right.
You were a yes vote for it. So this will appear on the ballot. Bottom line, Missourians get a say on this. And Best I understand it, what we're doing is basically giving the legislature a 5-year suspension of public votes on new taxes in order to go through and get something done to eliminate income tax to zero and then replace that with consumption taxes. I know there's a revenue trigger system that you do the math on. It's a number of decades, but it does put some sort of eventual assurance in of removing income tax. That is obviously not the stated plan, though, by the governor's office, who said, 2032, I think, was his goal.
Yeah, I don't remember what the exact date was.
What was your thought process on that? I know you voted for it, I think, both times?
I did.
Okay, yeah.
So I voted yes on the House version. I voted yes on the Senate version. I like the House version better, but, as we've talked about before, you can't always get exactly what you want. You got your choices between the status quo and something better. And moving towards the elimination of income taxes, the data absolutely supports that creates economic growth for the state. The part that I liked in the House version was that it had automatic triggers that were in the Constitution, whereas in the Senate version, it's a legislative mandate that says we have to go do this because it uses the word shall. Shall is an important word.
Right.
And and it doesn't really specify exactly what we will go do afterwards because we don't know exactly, what the right answer is right now. And more importantly, we don't even know if that's what the people want. Do they want us to move away from income taxes, which creates a better overall economy? And if the answer is yes, then they're going to elect their representatives to go down there and make the smart choices. And if they don't, they'll get replaced because that's how it works. So, and yes, if you're moving away from income taxes, then you have to move towards consumption or sales taxes. I just call them transaction taxes. And there's lots of different ways to do that. And I think if we get the mandate to move away from income tax and towards those transaction taxes, then a plan will be put in place that is not going to, let's just say there's different ways you can apply it, and you can apply it in ways that are less aggressive and ways that are more progressive, and not progressive in a bad way. I know what radio station I'm on, but
yeah. Well, and that, actually, that's actually an interesting point that I don't think that anyone yet, because we've had a lot of folks pro and a lot of folks con on here, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone put it quite that way. That what we're, my perspective from the get-go is you're asking me permission to suspend what I see as a very healthy constitutional protection. Hey, you don't get to raise taxes without a vote of the people. You're going to suspend that. I want to know why. I'd like to know what the plan is and what we're doing. And I've heard a few people say, oh, well, the plan is, and then they give me a high-level view, remove income tax, replace with consumption or transaction tax.
Correct.
They say, I get that, but that's not a plan. I want to know, what are the nuts and bolts? Tell me the rates. Tell me the dates. Tell me what we're putting on this list of transaction taxes, because now we're talking about more than just normal sales tax. We're talking new services and different things. And I've thought, well, what is that? It's like you're asking me for a loan from business loan from the bank, but you haven't given me the business plan. I'd love to see what the business plan is. That's an interesting point, though. Well, does the state of Missouri actually want to eliminate income taxes and go this direction? And if so, we'll cook up a plan. If not, that
Right.
I'm not sure I quite bite on that, but that's a better way to put it than I've actually heard anyone say it before.
So one of the controls that I think was better in the Senate version than was in the House version is that it ties a counterbalancing. So if we're going to increase the sales or the use taxes, then in the same legislation, that's when you can decrease the income taxes. So it ties I guess I would call it a balancing trigger. It ties it into the same legislation. So you can't increase taxes on a promise that you'll decrease them in later legislation. They're supposed to, the way this is written, it's going to come in on the same. So I think that's a good control. But again, the reality is that, let's find out what the people want. If they want us to move away, then.
Well, I'll tell you what the people want. What the people want is option number one: cut the income tax and cut spending at a commensurate level, and let's just shrink the size of government and get rid of a few things. Is there a will to do that? Has anyone raised that or not?
There's certainly people that want to. I'd love to do it too, but at the same time, you've got to get people that live, in all. You've got rural areas, you've got suburban areas, and you've got urban areas, and each of them have their own priorities. And where fiscal conservatism is concerned, they're not all the same. And so, how do you get people to, by that I mean legislators, we think sitting here in St. Charles County, that our perspective is 100% the right one. But there's people when you get down in southeast or southwest or northeast or northwest Missouri, they're what's important to them, even though they're still conservatives, is a little bit different. And so you just got to balance those out.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a big ask. I mean, that's what $8.5–9 billion I think that comes in from state income tax every year.
I think the last number I saw was 8.3 billion.
8.3. That's what I thought. It was somewhere in the eights, closing in on nine. That's a big chunk to just say let's cut government. And I mean, I'm me. I'd remove all sorts of stuff that I don't
Yeah.
think government ought to be doing. But the reality of that happening is one thing.
Yeah.
I'll ask you this:
Sure.
when it comes to the prospective future of what this plan would be, increasing sales taxes, broadening the base, I know is the phrase that's got a lot of people hot to trot. I know what that means, though. Like we're broadening the tax base in the sense that you're charging new taxes, transaction taxes on new things. Frankly, you're rolling up a lot of people in there that don't pay income tax. I mean that not in the sense of, low-income retiree folks. I'm talking about, gangbangers and people traveling through the state who don't live here and all sorts of people that are going to pay the transaction taxes. I'm curious if you as a business owner with employees and, transactions happening, if there's a list of concerns you have. We'll have to hit it on the other side. I hear my music. But I'd love to know that perspective because that's everyone goes, well, then what are we going to tax or what are we not going to tax?
All right.
There's a lot of things there. Scott Miller, District 69's on with us. We'll be right back on The Reckoning. Hey, welcome on back to The Reckoning. Into the next segment, we roll along. Make sure you say a hearty thank you to our show sponsors that make all this possible every single day. Grace Hauling, Brian Dawson Roofing, the Tilted Skillet down in Washington and Union, and, of course, the Prestige Financial Group. That's Steve Tornatori. We love these folks very much. I'd love for you to give them your business. They're the ones who make it possible for us to get on here, share some opinions, talk about a bunch of stuff each and every day that is important to you and me, the Missouri voters, American citizens. Make sure you put your money where your values are. That's what you get to do with these great businesses who we appreciate very much. When you get there, make sure you let them know that The Reckoning sent you. Thank them for their sponsorship. We certainly could not do it without them. But back to our conversation, I got Representative Scott Miller here in the hot seat, District 69. It's not quite the hot seat. It can get toasty in here, but it's not on purpose. It's not to make you sweat. But we're talking through a bunch of Missouri stuff, just kind of plugging in from our last segment, if you're just joining us in the car, talking about this new income tax provision, the question coming down on the ballot. The plan is still to be forthcoming, what it is. As a business owner, this is where I was going. As a business owner, I know that's one of the big concerns is, well, now hold on, we're going to start taxing a bunch of new stuff. Now, I understand at a high level, stop taking money directly from my income, from my productivity. It's a terrible way to tax. And let me have a say-so. I get to choose where I am, and I'm not going to spend money.
Right.
And I know I'm eliminating a lot of other discussion points that could go from there. But as a business owner, do you see sections where you're like, all right, we're going to have to do this delicately because you could really overdo it on new forms of taxation, new types of transactions that are going to be taxed, new amounts of taxation? Is there any business owner sense in you that worries about how that gets done in a certain way?
So I think the answer is yes, because as a business owner we engage in transactions, right? So if you start messing with those sales taxes, while it doesn't directly come out of the business owner's pocket, business owners can feel it. In markets, if the price of something goes up, people demand less of it. So if you're operating in a legal market and the taxes associated with that legal market go up, then it drives goods and services underground. I don't think we need to be concerned about that because I can't imagine any type of rates being stomached to go that kind of high. From the use of service, taxes on services, which Missouri doesn't currently have, that would affect my business negatively. But just because it affects your business negatively doesn't mean it isn't the right rule to apply. I think if I'm going I'll put it this way: if I were designing what it would look like. For example, tax on services, you've got services that fit different categories. Some of them are, goods and services that fit different categories. Basic necessities, grocery stores, healthcare, that kind of stuff. I think that should be very lowly taxed or maybe even zero. I don't know. Because that's what's going to hurt the low wage earners the most. Then you get these, kind of in the middle taxes that you have to pay particular attention to, maybe utilities or a bit different features on utilities like high-end information services versus basic connectivity. And then you get things that what I would consider non-necessity services. And I think if you took a look and created some tax rules that respected those and made it less painful for those on the low wage earning income, I think you can achieve the objectives all the way around with a minimal amount of discomfort. But, in the end, I taught my girls growing up, I said investment by definition is, a short-term loss for long-term gain. Is this the right investment, strategy after a fashion? And all the economics out there points to move away from income tax and towards a smart sales or use tax. So
Yeah, I think that's I agree with you, and that's one of those things where again we can talk about it now. It really matters what comes down the pike when the legislature
Right.
starts putting this together. But that would be one of my concerns. Is okay. So if we're going to do this, there could be two totally different tax rates: groceries, necessities, needs, and luxury sports cars and items.
Sure.
There's needs and wants, and if you got a want, you know what tax comes with that. If you got a need, we're not just here to blow you out of the water.
Exactly.
That's got to be mindful. So that's of course a question we're going to start asking. I will ask you this though, because we touch on this. One of the other things I know you were working on, and I think you had a couple of bills, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think they went super far. I know one of them got to committee, but you did some work on the minimum wage, world, because that was, of course, one that we passed in 2024,
Right.
Minimum wage hike. But of course, that was not a constitutional amendment; that was a statutory thing. So I know the legislature has tinkered with that quite a bit. What's a bit of a broad update on that? Because that was something I know a lot of Missourians weren't happy for, didn't vote for, and yet it passed with the majority of who showed up. What has the legislature done on that front to try to bring it back, maybe a little bit more to heal?
So, last year we passed what we call the fix to Prop A. The problem with that proposition is that it was the government vis-a-vis the voters acting as legislators. When they voted to make that Prop A law, it was deciding the price of goods and services between two private entities, the employer and the employee. And that fundamentally, for me, is a problem because the government should not be in the business of setting the price of goods and services in private transactions. So the minimum wage piece itself wasn't messed with when the Prop A fix went in last year, but the healthcare piece was. So I think is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, I just know that there was, I think that kind of fell to the wayside because we spent so much time talking about the fix for Amendment 3 with the new Amendment 3. We've had a lot of other stuff this year, but I saw a few of your bills that talked about minimum wage and some of the different exemptions and complaints. So I was curious if there was more still flowing from that, or if largely the legislature feels like we've kind of put a little bit of a fix down on what a lot of conservatives weren't very happy about with that Prop A.
Yeah, I don't know. Neither one of those bills really went that far this year, and I'll be honest with you, Speaker moved a lot of my other bills, so I was working them. But one of them was to address the wage complaint process. The state of Missouri has an administrative procedure, and the idea is basically it was a tort reform activity. It says, hey, let's take it to the administrative procedure. Let's let the government work its process with the person and their complaint, and then if it doesn't work, then they can go to court and get their day. The other one was the minimum wage threshold for the federal rule, which I think is carried here into Missouri, is $500,000 a year for a business. Those were $1,938. And so the other one was to say, hey, small businesses would be exempt from those wage obligations. Just again to provide some clearance for small businesses, to get a leg up and get a stronger foothold.
Yeah. It almost sounds like, though, when you just, because you're using some pretty, what I would call broad, limited government language when you say government shouldn't be involved, it almost sounds like you're saying there shouldn't be a minimum wage if Scott Miller had his perfect world. Am I hearing that?
Well, yeah,
you're allowed to
pretty
make
much.
big, bold statements. I mean, we're not holding you to it that you're going to do it.
At the end of the day, minimum wage is just it's propping up prices on goods and services. And as economic fiscal conservatives, anytime government is propping up prices for goods and services, that's not what I stand for. That's not what I think a lot of other conservatives and most any economic analysis will largely show that just creates bad outcomes.
Yeah, it does. I think across the board it does. That's why I'd love to see, as we talk about all of these issues, whether it's the income tax or, our transaction taxes. I like the way you say that because it's true. We're talking about a lot of different things. That minimum wage, all these different things down the line. The end goal is we're looking to make Missouri more competitive.
Agreed.
We want Missouri to be competitive in the sense that people want to move here. People want to open businesses here. People want to become an employee for whatever business because they want to live in the state. Making things simpler, clearer, less regulated, less government hands-on that have just manufactured this system we live in. That is the ultimate goal to get to.
Absolutely.
So, there's a lot of parts and pieces. And I know I'm about to hit a break here, so I won't crack open the AI egg yet. But I'd love to talk about artificial intelligence because you've done some work with this.
Yes.
And you'll use the next segment because this is certainly something. I just scratched the surface of it with Senator Nicola last week. And we'll do that with Representative Miller on the other side. Folks, you're on The Reckoning. Don't go anywhere.
cycles like a daily medication.
Hey, we're back on The Reckoning. Into the next segment we go, and it's time to talk about a little bit of artificial intelligence. Oh, my goodness. This has been a huge topic. I mean, I knew it would be a big topic. Culturally, of course, AI has just become so prevalent in everyone's daily lives, and I was not the earliest adopter of a lot of the chatbots and different AI tools out there, but I have really come to the point of like, okay, these are extremely helpful tools, but with some caveats.
Sure.
I'm not letting it take over big thinking for me. I'm not just going to replace creative work. I'm also very skeptical of who's behind the screens, the scenes, and who's actually, who's running these different companies, data privacy concerns. I feel like a lot of people are in the same place there, and legislative world is catching up to that very quickly as well, saying, okay, hold on. We're not here to regulate private business, but there are also a lot of concerns when it comes to AI, what it can be used to do, what it can be used to make fraudulent, what it can be used on the backside with companies and data. And of course, data centers, which that's not really AI necessarily in this sense, but the data centers have become a hot topic here in Missouri, which to me, that's more of a transparency and an infrastructure discussion than it is, the actual technology of AI. But I know you've got a big bill that's been moving through HB 1746, the AI Non-Sentience and Responsibility Act. And of course, that one, I think it went through committee, but it didn't pass the full House.
No, it went through all committees, and it's currently waiting to hit the floor calendar. I don't know that it'll happen this year. We've got a lot of Senate bills that we're working on right now.
Right. And I also know you're on the Missouri Future Caucus, if I'm correct. Okay. So tell me about this. What is your AI Non-Sentience and Responsibility Act? What's the main gist and what you're hoping to accomplish with this?
So basically, the legislation was set up to do two things. One, AI can't be a person. Just because you're using AI doesn't mean that you can absolve yourself of responsibility. You always have to have a person or some other legal entity, like a company, that can be held accountable for what the AI does. The other part of that, the non-sentience part, was it can't be a person. You can't marry it. I know it sounds silly, but
no, I see enough headlines. That's a real thing that needs to be legislated.
And so it can't be a person at the end of the day. And then the other piece was the responsibility piece. So people are developing AI. Companies are developing AI. They're developing it. They're deploying it. It's being used in Missouri. And that legislation was intended to create, that second part was intended to create a framework, and I based it off of NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And the idea was to create if businesses were compliant with this framework in the state of Missouri, it says you need to go do this, but if you do it, then it provided some protections in the courts. Putting it shortly, if a business demonstrates itself as a good actor by complying with this framework, then it absolves them of criminal and punitive damages. So it creates a semi-safe harbor for businesses developing or deploying AI in the state of Missouri. It still leaves regular liability, because if you take that away, then you're not protecting people anymore, and you have to protect people. But if somebody is a good actor, then the courts would treat them as a good actor.
So essentially, you talk about that framework of good things. Basically, you're making sure that companies know, hey, as long as you are behaving by this certain set of framework or lay down rules, if someone goes and uses your product to do something stupid or illegal or illicit, we're not necessarily coming after you and everyone else behind you. There's some backup here, or am I misunderstanding the point?
Yeah, that's about
of it?
right. It just kind of sets up, because developers are responsible for a piece of it, deployers are responsible for a piece of it, and then users are responsible for a piece of it. So if a user uses AI to go do something illegal, but the deployer and the developer didn't do anything, it's all on the user. If the deployer sets it up incorrectly, then the deployer would have some responsibility. And then the deployer, of course, is using let's just call it the AI module software, and there's design defects that should have been detected in the actual source AI module that the deployer is using, then the developer. So it kind of helps create a tiered scale so that liability lands where it should, and it prevents those types of lawsuits where people go chasing deep pockets when there really isn't. It's like the handgun manufacturers. You don't go chase the handgun manufacturers because somebody misuses a handgun.
Yeah,
same kind of concept.
That's the exact analogy I was going to go to. Is I'm all for that in the certain sense of like, look, if you maybe if you have a firearms safe company who says, our product does this and this and this to protect you against fires, you have a home fire. It actually did none of those things because they were lying. Okay, the company has liability. But if we're a gun manufacturer, you're not allowed to go and sue. I don't want it to be allowed to go and sue gun manufacturers because someone abused a tool that has no morality. It is just a tool. So in this case, if you're really building just a tool and you don't have problems inside that tool, you shouldn't be allowed to just hold a company liable because there's an ambulance
it
chaser
prevents
somewhere
that
who can
deep
make
pocket
money.
chasing that I think annoys most of us.
Now, how does this interact with the federal rules? Because I know there's a lot of ambiguity in that still. Of course, the one big beautiful bill that got passed last year, there was an AI moratorium in the states, which I was kind of 50-50 on. I look at that and I go, I don't love it when we assume, even for just a 10-year period, more control at the federal level. I'd rather that be at a lower level. But I also understand I don't want big blue states doing absolutely nutty stuff. So I was kind of 50-50. How does your bill interact with that? Are you allowed to do it even?
So the 10-year moratorium, if I remember correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't go into effect. They wanted it to go into effect, but didn't. It's the 2 executive orders that President Trump issued that's got everybody running skittish, and they've tied. Apparently, President Trump made the comment that if states do AI too much or wrong or in any way that makes him unhappy, that it was going to pull BEAD funding, which is the broadband expansion stuff. So there's a lot of people, and I think rightfully concerned that if Missouri does something wrong with AI, that could hurt Missouri's funding for those federal dollars. But I read both of those executive orders, and my take on it was, President Trump's intent was, look, don't create any AI regulation that's going to hamper economic development or going to hamper national security. And so I purposely designed this. The standards that I've actually put in place or in the legislation are actually what every federal contractor would be required to use if they were doing AI for any federal program. So it should be cleared, but that's my interpretation of it and not necessarily everybody else's.
Yeah. And I'm curious too, because I mentioned the data center thing, which this is, inside the AI world in a certain sense, but this leads me into a whole separate discussion. I'm curious at the Missouri level, the data centers have been very hot across a lot of our different areas.
Yeah.
Of course, Festus just tossed out a bunch of city council members who voted through a big proposal. We shut one down here in St. Charles that got pretty wild pretty quick. Some things that I'm like, you should have said that to begin with. Like the mayor's brother owns the land and we didn't know who the developer was. There's a lot of stuff where I go, no. The problem isn't that I don't want data centers in the U.S. I don't want to be the U.S., the new AI superstructure. I don't want to be relying on China and Thailand for that.
Right.
However, there's some serious concerns. One of those to me is the power grid. I'd love to see this be a conversation that talks about the expansion of nuclear power across the country. That, of course, involves federal regulation. I'm curious, how have those data center controversies potentially kind of influenced some of the discussions inside the legislature? Like, what can we do to look at these things and maybe plug some of the pieces that citizens are concerned about, like infrastructure and utilities, et cetera, and so on?
I think the perspective that if I could convey to everyone to keep in mind is this is an industrial development. Okay, we develop industry all throughout the state, all throughout the country. I think this is coming fast, and I think there's not enough good communication. Transparency, I agree, is a big deal. Actually, I ended up writing an RFP template that I've been handing out to everybody for municipalities and counties to use to help evaluate inbound, data center investigate, exploration from Amazon or whoever. And it's the power part. It's have the negotiation. Don't be anti-data center. Be, okay, how can we get the data center to benefit our community in a way that we want? Are we addressing the water concerns? How are we handling that? Are we addressing the power? Get it in the deal. I think a lot of times the people that are making the decisions in the municipalities and in the counties, maybe there's some consultants they could use to help them negotiate better deals. Actually, one of the ideas that I'd tossed out was put data centers on top of contaminated aquifers and let them pull the water out of the contaminated aquifer and then punch clean water out.
Yeah.
So I think it's just sitting down and going, okay, let's do this smartly. And smartly is always the right way to do something, right? But the data centers are going to have to be built, and and if they're not built here, they'll be built somewhere else, because it's just like we went from wagon wheels to rubber tires and aluminum wheels. I think everybody would do to just look at it smartly, and don't be anti, be pro smart.
Right. And see, that was that was one of my concerns, just as from the political grassroots perspective. I feel like our current environment politically in the United States is just, we are so often used to having to peg into one opposite corner or the other.
Yeah.
I'm either super all the way totally for this or super totally all the way against this or whatever it is. And I looked at it and I said, man, I see a lot of people who it almost, I agree. I have a problem with this data center proposed as it was in St. Charles or the one in St. Louis or different places. But I've got a list of reasons why I don't like this or I do like this part, or that one just sounds like a nonsense answer to me. It's about jobs. There's not going to be like millions of jobs created from this thing. Let's be real. But I saw a lot of people who just were kind of sectioned off into this. No, I'm opposed to the data center, which means I'm opposed to all data centers, which means I'm opposed to this. And I thought, well, no, hold on. That's just going in the opposite direction without thought. Just like the people who say, no, this is great. We should do it no matter what the cost.
Yeah. Negotiate.
You got to avoid those.
I mean, work with the people that want to put the data centers in there. Negotiate a deal with them that covers a lot of your taxes. I mean, there's a lot of money. Maybe that's how you get rid of property taxes for individuals.
That's an interesting connection. And it's true. If you ever, that's the thing. You want to see big, giant technology companies turn on a dime and talk about spending a lot more money. You offer them something very lucrative, like being in on the ground floor of AI. I've talked about it at a national level. You see all these big companies that were super hot to trot on being green and net zero carbon and all these other things, and then all of a sudden the AI boom comes, and everyone went totally quiet on that. Because why? AI demands power.
Right.
Now they're all looking, going, "Hey, fossil fuels are really cheap, and we need a lot more of them." Well, nuclear power. A lot of the green discussion disappeared because they knew they needed power.
Right. So, one of the things is that, that is a conversation I've heard tossed around is some of these data center folks are willing to put their own power generation in. So, okay. So if they generate their own power, then, that's a meaningful negotiating item for avoiding increased costs.
Yeah. And that's one of my primary worries is I know this is a power hog. And I already have a lot of concerns about the age and the 300-400
megawatts for some of these things.
Yeah, exactly. I know the age and the construction of our own grid across the country here in Missouri and everywhere else, and I look and go, I don't want to hook that on because we already are in a more fragile state than I would like to admit the United States is in. I would love to see new power generation being a part of every one of these deals.
And if they put their own generation down when they're building a data center, and then they connect that to the grid, that can actually be kind of a backfill in some cases.
That's true. There's a lot of things. I think smart is the way to do it, and that's negotiating, looking at all these deals. That's always good. But no, that's interesting because I saw the AI. I know you had another bill that I think it was introduced and read a second time. The provisions relating to what was that, by the way? I know it didn't move this session, but the provision establishment relating to companion chatbots. How is that separate from the AI sentience, non-sentience? And responsibility side, was that more specific in a certain direction?
So this was basically one of the ways that would be used. There was actually something similar to that had passed through the House that addressed companion chatbots for like mental health type stuff. The one that I had was going to bar it for children all the way around, and then the other one just put in some responsibilities for the companion chatbots, for adults. So that one, and then the other one I had was a labeling one, which again, didn't make it all the way, but we have a lot of good ideas that don't make it all the way, and that's just what it is. And
I know that was one of the big parts of the conversations like that. I've heard a few people raise the question. Well, I mean, it's a big giant internet company. They're all over the world, and here in the United States, how do you as the state regulate that? And I thought, well, here you just saw the rubber meets the road. We got age verification for adult websites, and all of a sudden, big immediate halt in Missouri, just like some other states.
Right.
It may be online on the World Wide Web, but Missouri, inside our borders, can actually have some pretty serious regulatory effect on some of these
people
products.
That build the networks in this country know where the IP addresses are.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a lot of people. You know what? Yeah, we know exactly where your IP is when you log into that. We
pretty
can
close,
tell.
yeah.
And you can, in fact, start to regulate some of these things where you say, that's pretty unsavory, and I can't change it the industry level. I can change it here in Missouri. So,
except for everybody using those VPNs, which I know some people like to do.
Well, let's not tell everyone about those because that'll help people. But no, the VPN world is certainly something that there's another layer. No matter what you do to try to regulate something for the good,
sure.
And usually we use regulation as conservatives as a dirty word. That often is the case, and it often
is the case.
A
lot of times can be. Yep.
But when you're trying to regulate something for good, there will always inevitably be ways around it. You just do the best that you absolutely can, and you have to do the right thing. It doesn't matter if it's everyone's going to circumvent that, so don't bother doing it. No, do the right thing.
Yep.
And then you tackle the problems as they come.
Exactly.
Which, of course, that was the point of the conversation we were having before we came on. Is when it comes to these things, there's a way in which you can either move the ball down the field or just stick to principle in a very ineffective way. Yeah. And I hate to see that happen a lot. I feel like we're kind of at a few of those points of impasse here in Missouri where we've got a lot of different factions that are stopping the how do we move the ball down the field and work strategically, even if our principles are in different spots. That is a very dangerous thing. It actually makes me wonder, and I know we're going to have to hit a break here, but it makes me wonder, you as a representative, on some of these hot button issues that we've talked a lot about at the grassroots level. What's the income tax thing, or some of the other stuff that's been going around? What do you actually hear? What's most effective that comes into your office when you hear from your constituents? Are you getting calls, phone calls, emails, or is it word of mouth out? Like what actually moves the needle for you?
What moves the needle for me is the personal ones, where they're, if it's the form ones where, it's because I'll get, sometimes I'll get 20 or 30 or whatever on some topic, and some of them have been even more than that. And it's just a patent template letter, somebody clicked a button. The ones that really stick are the ones that actually, they demonstrate that they've taken the time to understand the issue. They've, expressed their position, whether it's for or against, and they express their position and why. They're not calling me names. I mean, nobody likes, when you're being called names, hey, how can I help you? So basically just send the note in and explain why it's an important, how it helps or hurts, your family or your loved ones or your friends. And then be part of the solution. Help me understand what would work for you, rather than just say this is bad. So that's the meaningful engagement. Those, I read every email except for those form ones. I'll read the first one. I'm like, okay, this is the same form, but every one that is personally written, I read, and I can't make, I always try to remind people, it's like if I get 100 emails or 200 or whatever, I still represent a district of about 38,000 people. So I've got to take that in context, because silence is also a vote after a fashion, or an opinion, and it's an opinion of trust, to be fair. But yeah, it's like have the meaningful conversation that's going to help solve the problem, not just be mad.
Mm-hmm. Were there any of those hot button issues this year that really, like, not just you personally, specifically in your district, but across the board, you and your colleagues noticed, like, oh my gosh, there's really an uptick of people here who are meaningfully trying to engage us to give an opinion? With whether it was the income tax, being put together or something else, there was a lot of loud voices sounding off on it. Was there any of those that actually came with not even a majority, but a big section of voices that, like, oh my gosh, we're all talking about the fact that we're hearing from people on this issue? Yeah. Were there any of those this year?
So the self-directed disabled services, which was going to be a big budget cut, there were a lot of people that expressed a lot of interest. As a matter of fact, I sat down with one of my constituents and had like an hour and a half conversation with her. And actually, that budget ended up getting added back in. And I think actually fiscally it made good sense, because the people that would have come off of those SDF services would have been picked up by other state services that would have cost more. So it was actually fiscally sound to maintain that money.
Yeah.
So that was a hot topic earlier on in session.
Well, budget session. There's another one coming up, and you're asking for another term. Apparently, you're either a glutton for punishment or you're enjoying yourself and getting stuff done.
As long as the good Lord and the people want me there, I'm there.
Well, we'll talk about that. We'll hit a little future stuff on the other side of the break. We'll be right back on The Reckoning. Hey, back on The Reckoning. Into the last segment we go. I got Representative Scott Miller here with me still, the 69th district here in the county. Oh my gosh, county of St. Charles. Good grief. But cruising along on some stuff, and we just kind of devolved into military nerd, side on the last. Which you're an Army veteran. I'm not. I'm just a wannabe who loves all the stats and the history of it. But we kind of devolved in that. I'll bring it back though. So you're asking for another term.
Yep.
In the Missouri State House. What are your priorities to see accomplished next year? You look at it and say, all right, Lord wills, I'm going to get through this election. What are you going to be looking to heavily be involved in or push yourself in 2027?
Well, I'm going to assume that the AI bill that I've got that isn't going to make it out this year. So I definitely want to bring that one back again. If the people send us back with a mandate to come away from income taxes, then making sure that I've got everybody on the right side of that one, where we're doing the most good and the least harm, that will be a major piece of importance for me. And then after that, I really haven't thought that far ahead yet. I'm just trying to keep my head down and keep doing some good and blocking some bad for the remaining 3 weeks we got.
Do you see any? I know that the legislature has made some moves when it comes to property tax, obviously personal, real estate both. We had measures on many ballots this past beginning of this month. But are there any future considerations you're hearing discussed as well at the state level? I know a lot of those are handled by county and local. Is there anything else at the state level that's being discussed? Because of course, property tax is just, in my mind, one of the more egregious,
Certainly
ones. Not
the
most,
more morally
but
egregious.
one of the more egregious ones. What from the state level have you heard discussed, or what would you maybe like to say? Hey, we could do this. But we should do this and go forward. What do you think?
So I think the issue of property tax is a difficult one for us to address at the state level. And the reason is because property tax is basically a three-variable equation. It's the assessed value of whatever the underlying asset is. It's the tax rate that the counties apply, and then it's the valuation rate that the state applies. People don't realize most of your property taxes, the state's not doing it. We get such a very tiny amount, that goes down to Jeff City for property taxes. At the state level, we could drop the valuation down, but then we're doing it for the entire state. And not the entire state wants to get rid of property taxes the same way that the other parts of the state. Everybody wants to reduce taxes, but nobody can agree on which tax.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem we face with that, and that's particularly true where property taxes are concerned. So I did have a property tax bill. Unfortunately, it had mixed reviews, I think, for a lot of those reasons. It made it through committee last year, and it just basically, it said if it's yours and you don't pay your property taxes, the courts can't sell it out from under you. And I think Senator Schnelting tried to put the same bill forward. And it answers the moral question of whether or not your property is yours or not. It didn't answer the question of whether or not you owe a fee for living in your community, but it just said that it's yours and the courts can't take it from you. So that one was an easy one for me to address from the standpoint of put it forward. I'll put that one forward again too, because it's either yours or it's not yours. And if it's yours, then they can't take it unless you committed a crime.
Yeah, and that's I mean, that really comes down to the moral side of it. I know we could tax better or worse on that, but do I own this or am I renting this is a big question. So that's interesting. Well, again, Representative Scott Miller, you can find him on Facebook, State Representative Scott Miller over on X. You don't post as much over there. That's where I am.
I'm not much of a poster.
It's the good one, though. At Scott Miller USA. It's nice and patriotic. But you can follow along with him. District 69 here in St. Charles. Well, I'm sure we'll probably talk to you again before election time because we've got some big stuff coming in August. And of course, for you for November. But Scott, I appreciate your time. Thanks for hanging out.
Well, thank you, and enjoy your shenaniganery in the second hour.
Shenaniganery in the second hour is ahead. You heard it. The representative said so. We'll be right back after the news here on The Reckoning.